Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, we're going to be doing a beginner's guide to the Hasselblad 500CM. I'm pleased to announce the release of my Capture One and Lightroom presets, Metamorphic Portraits, The Sound of Silver, and Rangefinder. These are all available for purchase at my website. Go to kevindealphotography.com or check out a link in the description below. And now, on to today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. So I've already done beginner's guides on the Mamiya RB67 and the Mamiya C330, and those videos have done very well thanks to you, the viewers. So since you all like my beginner's guide to film camera videos, we're gonna do a beginner's guide to the Hasselblad 500CM. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you are here because you are curious about the name Hasselblad and the legend that comes with it. Victor Hasselblad made Hasselblad cameras to be consumer cameras so he could take pictures of birds. But like many things, sometimes they take on a life of their own. The Hasselblad system, for its small, modular design, was adopted by journalists, fashion photographers. They even use Hasselblad cameras to document the moon landing. So with all that in mind, let's dive into this model, the 500CM. The 500CM is not the first Hasselblad 500 series camera. They did come out with the regular 500 before this. This was just a slightly improved version of it. The main difference between this camera and those cameras is that the replacement of the glass and all that didn't have to be done by a technician. And there's some other small minor tweaks, but in general, this is probably the most popular and best value Hasselblad 500 series camera. That of course is debatable, and you could make entire episodes on the differences between Hasselblad cameras, so we're not going to do that because in general, they all function about the same way. So I'm gonna tell you how this one functions, take you through it, and then from there, you can do your research if you decide that this is the right one for you, or maybe there's a feature or two you want on a newer or older model, maybe due to budgetary constraints or something that you just want. So this is a single lens reflex camera, an SLR, and what's really unique about it is how modular it is. You look at it and you're like, okay, that's kind of cool, but you can take the lens off. You can take the film back off. You can even take the viewfinder off, and now you just have this little box. That's all there is to it. It's pretty straightforward. You can even take that glass out on the top. So apparently you can also even take the winder off, which I've never done. So there's a lot of customizations you can do to this camera. Something that is important about this camera is that it has detachable film back. So I'm a Mamiya C330 owner, which, like this camera, by the way, shoots in a 6x6, and you can check out the review of that if you want. And I love my C330s, but one of the shortcomings of that camera is that you can't use removable backs. Well, you can do that with the Hasselblad. The A12 is what I have. They make a couple different types of removable backs for it. And what's the advantage of that? Well, you can have a film back of color, you can have a film back of black and white, you can have a film back with a 100 speed film in it, a 400 speed film, an 800 speed film, whatever you want. And so that gives you that flexibility if you need it. I did mention that the lenses are detachable like many SLRs out there. And something of note is that this is a bayonet mount, and that these lenses actually have the shutters inside the lenses themselves. The shutter is not in here. There's a mirror up function in here, which we'll get into later, but this actually has a leaf shutter, which is inside the lens. And another thing that is of note is that you control your shutter speed and your aperture all right here.
They tend to go from a 500th of a second all the way to a second. And then they also have bulb. And then of course your aperture varies depending on lens model. It should also be noted that this uses a V mount and that there's a galaxy of lens choices out there. We're not gonna go too in depth on the lens choices in today's episode. I think that could be an episode unto itself. There's a lot of lens choices out there. And so we're gonna do a photo shoot today just using the standard 80 2.8. And if you come over from the full frame world in a 6x6, you take 80, you multiply it by 0.55, that's the crop factor. So this is like a 44 millimeter lens, basically, field of view. So we're gonna use this guy today. We'll use Kodak T-Max 400 today. First and foremost, something you gotta keep in mind about the film backs is that they do have this aluminum dark slide on them. And if you pull that out, it exposes the film. Now, most models have a safeguard built into them to where you can't just pull it out and expose your film, and that's probably a good thing, I would imagine. So you see this thing right here, if you just pull this tab out and then you twist it, then you can pull it out. Now, I purposely left my last roll of film in here so you can see what it looks like when you pull a roll of film out. Now, this is a 120 film camera. That's important to know because if you're in the market for this camera and you shoot on 35 millimeter, that's not gonna work. You're gonna have to buy 120 film for it. So I do have a roll of Ilford Delta 100 in there. I will tell you that this cassette, if you go out and you purchase cassettes, depending on what year they were made, the way that this opens up could vary. So in this model, it just opens up on the top. But on other models, there's like a rocker where it'll rock one way or the other. Whereas this one, it just, both sides open up. So that's something to keep in mind. When you're done with the roll of film, just take this out. And then I just take this guy and lick it, because that's what you gotta do. Like that, seal it up to get ready to send off to your lab. And I'm gonna put this in my back pocket. Now let's take our Kodak, there you go. Always make sure you put all your trash away. You gotta take this empty spool and move it over. And just wiggle it until it snaps into place. Now you need to open your other spool of film. And what you do is you seat that spool of film in here, just like so. You notice that this is still open. Now you close it and you pull the film. So you're gonna pull the film, and there's this, you see this little thing right here? When you turn this guy, see how that moves up and down? Like that? That's what this is doing when you turn it. So it serves two purposes. And then what you do is you take the black side of the film right here and make sure that it's facing out. And you just move this underneath. Make sure it's under that groove. What you do is you take this leader and you put it in the groove of the spool. Once it's in there, you just start turning it. I like to hold it and just make sure it starts going, which it's doing. So once you get it in, you see there's an arrow right here. All you do is you turn until you see this arrow line up with that arrow. So right about there. Now that we know that we've got this done, you just take this guy. First of all, sometimes the dark slide, this little piece right here will fold in and you can't get the cassette into your film back. So just make sure this is out of the way and then make sure it's in there. Sometimes you have to jiggle it a little bit, but it's definitely in there. And then once it's in there, you just lock it. So you just turn it like this, push it down. You can wind it right here, and you'll know that it stops because it'll do it on its own. So you just keep going, wind, 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 and then it'll stop. And you'll know it stops because you'll see a 1 right there. Then you just fold that down and you're ready to attach it to your camera. There's 2 little hooks right here. And on the bottom of your film back, there's 2 little holes right there. So you just take this, hook it in there, and then as you do that, you'll see two latches up here, and you just close it. Now to open it, you take this little thing right here, and you just move it off to the side. And when you do that, the film back comes off. I did talk about that there's two different viewfinders. So there's a prism finder, which I tend to use more for portraiture and stuff like that, and controlled environments where I don't need things to be small, I don't need things to be light. But when I'm just kind of doing some general photography, I like to save on space. And so if you take this and you move it to the side, up pops your waist level finder. Now, there's also, if you hit this again, a little magnifier. The only thing that you need to know about a waist level finder, if you're not familiar with how they work, is as you look through it, things that are like if you move right, it'll go left, and you move left, it'll go right. So that'll kind of throw your lateral movement off. That's something that you'll get used to over time.
If you own multiple viewfinders and you find yourself needing to change your viewfinder out, the first step is to remove the film back. After you remove the film back, simply grab your viewfinder and slide it out. Once you slide it out, grab your new viewfinder and slide it in. Then replace your film back and you're good to go. Now let's talk about how to attach and detach lenses. Looking at the camera from the front in the lower right side, you'll see this little button down here. Now grab your new lens and align the red dots from the lens to the red dot on the camera. Now attach the lens to the camera body and twist it clockwise. To detach the lens, it's just the opposite. Push the button in the lower right corner and twist the lens counterclockwise. That's how you attach and detach a lens. And do keep in mind that you have to have the shutter cocked in order to detach and attach lenses. It's also important to note, if you own this camera, that sometimes you have to recock your lens. Remember, it's a leaf shutter inside the lens, and if it's not cocked properly, then the two mechanisms won't align, and then the lens sometimes won't mount and won't fire. So sometimes you have to put a tiny little flathead screwdriver into this groove to recock the lens so the two parts align. They do make a special tool you can buy in places like eBay to handle this task. In 2 years, I've only had this happen to me once.
So to take a picture, all you gotta do is take out this aluminum dark slide. Now don't lose it, find a good place to put it. And then you look through, you push this button and it'll take a picture, and then you wind it to go to the next frame. And if you aren't ready to take your next frame, you just replace the dark slide. So anyway, I think I've given you enough overview of the basics of this camera. Let's go use it out in the field and see what kind of pictures we can get with our Kodak T-Max 400. Something that should immediately stick out to you all about this camera is that the max shutter speed on it only goes up to like a 500th of a second on the lenses. If you're used to using a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, you tend to be able to go up to 4,000 or 8,000th of a second. You can't do that with this. So the only way to slow down the light is to use neutral density filters or to stop down your aperture. I don't have a neutral density filter, so I'm not gonna be shooting wide open. At f8, it's saying 1/160th. I'm gonna do 1/125th at f8 and see what I can get. There's this little thumb thing right here. And as you move this, you see it's at f8. And while it's loose, you can also move your shutter speed. So I want 1/125th f8. That white line is at f8 and 1/125th. So we should be good to go on this shot. I'm gonna get back a little further and see what I can get. I'm gonna do the mirror up first, and now, there we go. One shot in. If you wanna cut down on vibration, there's this little lever right here, and when you push it up, the mirror goes up, and that cuts down on vibration, then that way you can just take your picture. Now, you don't have to use that if you don't want. You can just take your picture by using the shutter release, but if you want a little less vibration, you hit this, the mirror goes up, and then when you push this, there's a little less vibration going on. So I tend to use that method when I can, 5.6. And I'm gonna shoot it at 1/125th just to see what I get. Ooh, Mr. Sunshine's a little higher than I want him to be. Mirror up, and 1, 2. Now it should be noted that when you put that mirror up, you can no longer see your composition. So you need to be locked in to what you're shooting. And if you're not, and you need to recompose, that could be an issue. So if you listen to my podcast, you can hear Brandon and I make fun of YouTube film photographers who just take pictures of very inanimate objects, benign objects, things that are kind of boring, and here I am taking a picture of a pretty inanimate object. So life comes at you fast. I'm at my in-laws here in West Texas for Thanksgiving, or as the rest of the world calls it, Thursday. One of the things I do love about the waist level finder is it lets you get down low. Sometimes you want to take a shot from down low, and when you have a prism finder like this, you can't really see it. So that is one of the advantages of the waist level finder that I really like. F11, 1/500th of a second. Let's shoot this here cowboy. There we go. And get him in focus. One. I'm gonna get the car going by too. There we go. Now, when you're done with the roll, you just take this guy and wind until it gets loose. Keep going, and when you start feeling it getting super low in resistance, that's when you know that you're like completely wound, which I'm well past that. I just wanted to over exaggerate it so you can see how I do things. And that's really it, man.
While it's fun to take pictures of worn out barns and water collection tubs, I felt like the episode would be a lot cooler if I showed you my bread and butter, which is portraiture. I put various film stocks through this Hasselblad over the last couple years, and I've been very pleased with the results. When I first got the camera, which is a pretty common thing, one of the film backs had a light leak in it. That is something that you have to deal with if you're going to shoot on 40 to 50-year-old cameras. You can buy a $15 to $20 light seal kit on eBay. With a little bit of rubbing alcohol and about 10 minutes of your time, you can replace that with a sealing kit and you'll be back up and running in no time. Now, this camera is a legend in the studio, so I did try it out on studio sessions over the past couple years, and I find that it did a great job. It worked just fine with my Godox flashpoint strobes. You just get one of those little cables, you plug it into your trigger, and you're good to go. So as you can see right here, the 500CM produces fantastic pictures. However, let's talk about whether or not this camera is worth the hype or whether or not it's even worth buying at all.
So now that I've shot for a while on the Hasselblad 500CM, what are my thoughts? Well, let's talk about the pros and the cons of owning and using this camera. First, let's start with the pros. I find that the experience of shooting on this is very pleasant. It's a machine, it's built well. The parts, if they wear, you can replace them. It's not like shooting on a mirrorless camera where you have meters, and you have batteries, and you have motherboards and all that. This is a machine, it's mechanical. And there's a rhythm to shooting on this that I rather like. I have shot on and owned several medium format cameras, and I have to say that the experience of shooting on the Hasselblad is my favorite, which leads me to my next point, is that for a medium format camera, it's pretty small. I've seen some other reviews of this camera where people claim that it's large, but in all honesty, anything that can fit into a messenger bag, to me, especially for a medium format camera, film camera, that's pretty small. I don't really know what people are complaining about. Even when I put the prism finder on it, it's not that large. Once you figure out the rhythm of this camera, it does kind of become a grab and go camera in the context of medium format. It's still not as fast as shooting on a mirrorless, but it is fast in terms of medium format. Not only can I take this camera and put it in a messenger bag, but I can usually take another film back with me too. And so I almost always, on a sling around my shoulder, have black and white and color ready to go with extra rolls of film, and it doesn't take up that much space. Oftentimes I can even fit in an extra lens. Another thing that's positive about it is that it does take beautiful pictures. A lot of it depends on your film stock and your lenses, but the camera, if you put in good film stock, you put in good lenses through it, it's gonna give you great results. There's a term, they don't make them like they used to, and that definitely applies to this camera. I don't really know a lot of modern cameras that give you the experience and the feeling of shooting on this. And of course, the fact that there are probably over 100,000 of these in circulation, if you do run into a problem, parts are still easy to get. Another thing I love about this camera is the customization. You can take everything off and put something new on. It is very modular. That's from the lens to the viewfinder to the film backs to the winders, etc. You can even upgrade the glass on it to make things brighter and have more contrast. I also put shooting in 6x6 under the pros because most of you come over from digital mirrorless. You're used to shooting in a 2x3 format, and shooting in a different format sometimes can make you stand back, reevaluate your composition and how you see things. And so I put that under the positive, the experience of shooting in 6x6. I feel like it can give you fantastic results. And I think a lot of you, there's a familiarity to shooting in 6x6 anyway, because you're used to seeing the world through the eyes of Instagram, which we can debate whether that's a good or a bad thing, but it's definitely happening in your subconscious. I mentioned that you shoot slower on this camera. I consider that to be a positive because it makes me shoot with more intention, but let's talk about the cons. For those of you who want to go fast, this is not a fast camera in relation to your mirrorless camera. It's a little faster than, say, a RB67, which is a big, clunky camera, but it's not a fast experience. It's not something you want to run and gun with. And to be quite honest, I don't know if you'd want to run and gun when you consider the price of film. That's another con of this camera, is that the cameras themselves, you're talking about between $1,500 and $3,000 for a Hasselblad system. That's super expensive. And of course, the expenses don't stop at the camera. You got to buy film, which sometimes is $1 or $2 per shot. Another con of this camera is that if you demand the best image quality possible, you may find yourself having to lug around a tripod. And well, I personally hate tripods, and so my way around this is that I just use higher speed film, and I live with my occasional misses and my occasional blurry shots. But if you're one of those people who demands perfection out of every shot, you want the sharpest shots possible, you're probably gonna have to lug around a tripod. And lastly, I will say that while image quality is a pro of this camera, I think there's a little bit of mystique built around this camera when you compare it to other cameras that are out there. You compare it to something like a Mamiya C330. I think you're gonna be hard pressed to really tell the difference in the quality between what you can produce with the C330 and this. I'll show some examples on the screen right now. Can you tell which shot was taken with the C330? Can you tell which shot was taken with the Hasselblad? The main point I want to drive across there isn't that this gives you inferior image quality. It doesn't. It gives you amazing image quality, but it's really a debate of value. Is this a great value for the money? When you look at the examples on the screen, I'm sure a lot of you will be hard pressed to tell the differences between which one's the Hasselblad and which one's the C330. And to me, that tells me that the Mamiya C330 is an incredible value because it's 4 to 5 times less for one of those bodies than it is for this body. So who should buy this Hasselblad 500CM? Well, if you're a film dork like I am, somebody who is a geek and loves to collect old cameras, old, important, historic cameras that are a pleasure to shoot, something that shoots in a 6x6 format, gives you an amazing quality, gives you a galaxy of options, customization in its modular setup, then this is the camera for you, assuming that the price isn't out of your budget. Who should avoid this camera? Everybody who wants everything that I just said but has a limited budget. If that's the case, I think you should go look at something like a Mamiya C330. I think that it's an incredible value for the money, but yes, there is a little bit of mystique to this camera. It's absolutely gorgeous. I'm gonna keep mine, but it's not necessarily a fit for all of you, and that's just something to keep in mind. That does it for today's episode. I hope each and every one of you enjoyed it. Do you own the Hasselblad 500CM, or do you own a different model? Are you wanting to get this? Tell me about it in the comments below. If you like this channel, I humbly ask you to click the subscribe button below. And if you're a fan of this channel and you want to hear my uncensored opinions about photography, I highly recommend you check out the F11 Photography Podcast, which is available on all major platforms, including Apple and Spotify. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.